Planning Commission meeting of April 9th, 2024. It's called to order. Call the roll.
Abernathy.
Here.
Jones.
Here.
Hoskin.
Here.
Patel.
Here.
Clough. Middleton.
Here.
Martin.
Here.
You've received copy of the minutes of the March meeting. Are there any corrections or deletions or additions? Is there a motion?
Motion to approve.
Second.
Abernathy.
Aye.
Jones.
Aye.
Hoskin. Aye. Patel.
Aye.
Middleton.
Aye.
Martin.
Aye.
Are there any corrections or additions to the agenda? And seeing none, the agenda is set. Move on to item 5.
Preliminary plat for WP subdivision.
So this first item on the agenda this evening is a 4-lot residential subdivision. The property is zoned R1, so 4 single-family residences are proposed for these lots. With that, the applicant successfully addressed all of staff comments. And in addition to the request, they have requested a waiver to have street improvements along Longstreet and Ridgely Avenue.
Discussion. Guess the real issue before us is whether we should allow that deviation. I guess my only concern or question really is about drainage. It's all sloping downhill from Longstreth to the other way, and it looked like on the plans, I wasn't sure I understood it, but it looked like there were culverts where there might be driveways.
That is correct. So with that, staff could request contingent approval of the construction drawings by the engineering department.
Okay, is staff okay with the requested exceptions?
Yes, so engineering had reviewed it, considering it is open ditch right now. That would all have to be built up to even accommodate the sidewalks. They did not see an issue with the request.
Any questions?
No, sir, and that's been pretty common practice over the years, especially in places like that in town, so. Motion to approve the preliminary plat with the waivers.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Call the roll.
Abernathy.
Aye.
Jones.
Aye.
Hoskin. Patel.
Aye.
Middleton.
Aye.
Martin.
Aye.
Is item 6, does that need to be tabled? Is that what you're requesting?
Yes, staff is requesting to table it pending revisions being submitted by the applicant.
Okay. Is there a motion to table?
So moved.
Second.
Okay. Abernathy.
Aye.
Jones.
Aye.
Hoskin. Patel.
Aye.
Middleton.
Aye.
Martin.
Aye.
Expansion of a non-conforming use at Sherwood Youth Storage.
So this next item on the agenda is an expansion to an existing non-conforming use. With that, the current use on the property is interior climate-controlled storage facility. And what the applicant is requesting, there is a gated area to the west of the building, and they are proposing prefabricated 15 by 10 storage buildings. With that, here is a photo of it. So with that, staff did the calculations as it pertains to existing lot coverage, and I will go into that real quick because there is 2 discrepancies as it pertains to the square footage of the lot. One of them that was mentioned was 125,000 square feet. It's a little over, that's assessor data. So with that calculated with the building footprint, that was 35.2%. So in C3, 35 is the max lot coverage. With the platted square footage of 129,396, I believe, that was 36.2. So this would increase that proposed to over 38%. So with that alone, staff has determined that would require variance and would recommend denial of the application.
Okay, this requires a public hearing. Does anybody wish to speak to this request? Okay, hearing none, the public hearing is closed. Open for discussion.
Now, these are going to be standalone by itself, right? It will not be attached to the building.
The way I read it, they would be attached and permanent.
So whenever in speaking with the applicant, would you like to speak, Jason? It was not understood that they would be attached. They are prefabricated temporary structures, but these in that nature would be permanent. But it does count towards the total lot coverage.
If you're going to address this, you've signed in your name.
Yes. I'm Jason with Davis Engineering. They are prefab, they're not gonna be connected to the building, there's gonna be a space in between it. Because there's a sidewalk back there with their access doors to the climate control on that side. The that whole back piece is fenced in, got landscaping on it. The front part of it's a brick Cascade type fence on the front that's already existing. And then these buildings, they come prefabbed, already done up. They just bring them out there, set them down, they're ready, pretty much ready to go.
Okay,
So I think the question in my mind is whether they actually are permanent because they're made to be movable.
They're gonna be
So, with
permanent,
a
yes. They're not
forklift.
gonna be moved. That's where they're gonna be.
Are they attaching them to a slab or something?
That I do not know yet. I'm not aware of it yet at this
Okay.
time. I mean, I can find that out, but. I mean, the structures that you see there, those are permanent. That's in Searcy. They've got several of them at that site in Searcy. They're all permanent, not moving. They've been there for a while.
Yeah, I was just looking at the product literature and it says you can move it with
Oh,
a
yes.
pretty hefty forklift, so.
well, I thought it was a pretty good staff review. My concern is that it's non-conforming use in this zone. And as a non-conforming use, then we have to worry about the expansion of a use that's not permitted, in effect. Secondly, it's a non-conforming lot coverage, which means what the regulations say is that you cannot increase the structure's nonconformity. And to the extent that you're adding additional storage facility to it, you're expanding the facility. And it cannot be expanded outside of the existing structure, which this does. So I don't see, in my review of this, I don't see a way to approve an expansion of a nonconformance that would violate the code. That's my sense of it.
No, I agree with everything you said. This storage topic's been an issue with this commission for a while, so I'd make the motion to deny the application.
Abernathy,
Aye.
Jones,
Aye.
Hoskin, Patel,
Aye.
Middleton,
Aye,
Martin.
Aye.
application's denied.
Okay. Old business, amendment to the Sherwood zoning code regarding chapter 140209 amendments.
If I'm not mistaken, this is a continuation of the public hearing we had last month.
Yes, correct.
But first, we'll go ahead and talk about the revisions that have been made prior to opening that up.
Sounds good. Okay, so before you this evening, so what staff did is we went back with the recording as well as the minutes and mashed together just the conversation and tried to reflect that with the amendments to the amendment portion of the code. So with that, I will take any questions. But also in addition, there is some highlighted language in green, and that was added today and is present before you. So with that, the highlighted portion will be on D8. And staff, in your initial packet, there was a strike through to that provision, and we've decided to retain it, but only have it with an adopted emergency clause to where that could be applicable.
Say that again?
So on D8, where it says the city council may amend this code in accordance with the provisions of 1456, 423 of Arkansas Code annotated with an adopted emergency clause.
Okay.
So still allowing that as an option in certain scenarios to where that would be necessary. And I do believe that was the only addition to the language. So with that, I guess I will open it for discussion on the amendments.
Well, I'll go ahead and call the public hearing back to open. Does anybody wish to speak? Hearing nothing but crickets. We don't need to extend this any further, do we?
I don't foresee the need to do
Okay,
so.
then I'm calling the public hearing
Okay.
closed. I basically liked all of these. I thought they were improvements. I wasn't quite sure I understood the yellow highlighted thing on number 6 about notice of secondary public hearing, no impact on actuarial advertisement. What's that?
Okay, so with that, how I interpreted it, now that James is here, he can speak to it. When it was talking about an additional public hearing, there were concerns of not meeting the advertisement deadline and having to proactively go ahead and advertise without an outcome of what was to be. So I interpreted that as advertising via city website and having that available at City Hall for patrons to view as a public hearing, that it was going to be at the next meeting. So that was how I interpreted it. Was that the intent?
That specific provision,
Yes.
let me,
Talk about an additional public hearing if it's remanded back to the planning commission,
yeah,
additional,
basically that it would need to be re-advertised.
advertised in local circulation? Okay,
That was what the intent was.
okay. Well, then we'll have to,
We might have to adjust that because we've still got the problem, and it was referring to D3, which has to do with posting the stuff on the website and putting it at City Hall as opposed to the public hearing section of this. And my concern about it was only that if we use the word public hearing and don't advertise it 15 days in advance, we run afoul of state law on that. At least that's what I would fear would happen.
So on that, I think a possibility, one of the other things that I remember after watching the meeting is if the matter is remanded back to the planning commission, an additional public hearing at the next regular meeting. I think if you just struck the language at the next regular meeting, and just had an additional public hearing at the planning commission shall be required in public notice given in accordance with 14.02.09.d.3, that would solve the issue, I think.
okay.
Yeah, the timing might work out, but in most cases, because of the way the council meets compared to when the planning commission meets, that would be awfully tight. And if I'm not mistaken, it's usually advertised on Sunday, right?
It runs on Sunday.
Well,
It is
they could
tight.
never
Sometimes
make
it's
it.
after the
Yeah,
fact
probably would.
regardless.
Yeah, it'd probably never make it.
And if it makes it back here, there probably are revisions that would be required, so
Yeah.
I don't
You'd have
think
to
that it would
re-advertise it.
impact. Okay,
And that provision, the idea of that provision is if it's controversial enough that it's gone to council and it's headed back, that probably means that the public has some thoughts about it. And that likely a public hearing would be necessary. So that's the reasoning behind.
That's kind of safe harbor.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question about paragraph 3? Why did we go from 30 days to 7 days?
where are you at? Oh,
Same three.
it's in line with the same, just the public notice is how we currently do it. And I will allow James, that's my interpretation of it, is we currently do post 7 days in advance. And that information is available at City Hall and on the website,
Yeah.
based on our schedule.
Okay. But we have the information at least 15 days in advance of that, correct?
Right, sometimes, and also we're waiting on revisions at times. So whenever that's advertised, and even sometimes we're moving away from the schedule of if you do the bare minimum to get the application in, you're on the schedule, and then it never comes to fruition. So that was my interpretation. If there's a different suggestion, I'm open to it.
Well, I think too, this is written in mind originally of if the city used emergency clauses and the city did all 3 readings at one meeting, but that is not normal practice currently. And so I think the fact that the council is doing 3 separate readings at 3 different meetings, we don't necessarily need to have that break that is put in before it goes to planning commission of having it out there even before it shows up to you guys, because there is so much public review. Because there's a public hearing, and then that's gonna continue on until it gets passed out of here, and then it goes to council and it's read once, and then it goes to council again and it's read the next month, and then it goes to council again, it's read the next month after that, and then, you know, and so I think that 30 days, if the council didn't have that policy, that would probably be pretty appropriate. But given that the way that the council's operating, that 7 days is, I think, is fine.
Okay.
It also seems to me like 30 days was back in the pre-computer age.
Yes.
And right now, I think the big difference between the way things used to operate is what's on the website. It's available to everybody quickly.
Yeah.
At the same time, it's available to us.
So I have a question. What's the difference between the 7 days in paragraph 3 and the 15 in paragraph 4?
So when you have a notice of public hearing, so for instance, if we were going to put a notice of public hearing, that notice of public hearing would say that the planning commission is going to have a public hearing regarding amendments to the amendment section or amendments to the sign code. It wouldn't have the specific technical language that's included in there because, Lord, if we publish the entirety of that, the city would, all they'd be doing is paying money for ads.
Column space in the paper.
Yeah, it is a very expensive, and so that's the reason why.
So it's the general description part of it that makes it
It's always
unique.
just a general description.
Yeah, okay.
Any other questions?
No, I just got a couple grammatical ticky things, I guess. There's a few places for Shelby or James, whichever one of you is the editor of the document. There's a few places where, and forgive my ignorance of what the symbol's called in front of the code section annotations.
That's
That-
section.
The section symbol, okay, it's missing in a few places. And then you now have a formatting issue. When you added the green, it's now number 8 and you have nothing in number 7.
So I think in those locations where it's got the double asterisk, that if we took out the language on the line above that, where we talked about the additional public hearing to the, before the planning commission shall be required and public notice given. I think
Okay.
if we substitute that language, then the highlighted yellow language isn't necessary.
Gotcha, okay.
In that location, it wouldn't be necessary anymore.
Okay, if it's going away in the final version with that, that's fine. Just
Yeah.
pointing that out that I did see a few of them missing.
And just to make sure I understand, what you're showing is number 8 with a green highlight. Is that going away or is that back?
That's
back.
That's
And
back,
the-
so
the
that will be
reason-
number 7.
Yes.
Yeah, the
It really
reason
needs to be
being
7, yeah.
Yeah.
is, let's assume that there is a situation where the city council needs to make an immediate change to the code, and there is an emergency clause. We don't need to have open up the argument to where, by the fact of the way that the city has amended this, that provision in state law is now superseded, because the standard in the code is more stringent than what state law allows, right? Because basically, the amendment procedure, in state law, it provides two amendment procedures. One, the normal procedure, which is what we have described here, and then a majority vote of the city council. And it is often argued that when, in a zoning ordinance, if a city just says, this is the procedure, that then it closes the door to that majority vote of the city council. And so it felt like it was important to preserve that in the instance where there's an adopted emergency clause.
My understanding was that the only time that would be an issue is if the city code or the city ordinance was more prescriptive. You couldn't violate your own ordinance.
Well, I think in effect it would be becoming more prescriptive because it's not saying that that is an option. It's saying this is the manner in which you can amend the code. And that's the main reason as to why to include that, just so that that option remains open.
It remains an option, where I've seen it before, is that it was only exercised usually when there was an honest-to-goodness emergency. For instance, I know of one case, and I've got an Attorney General's opinion on it, that when a tornado went through, I believe it was BB, that a city council wanted opinion if they could immediately allow mobile homes where they weren't allowed before on a temporary basis, and they passed an emergency ordinance to allow that. That's clearly appropriate. Any other questions?
Well, I saw Mr. Cobb shaking his head.
No, I was
Naked.
just saying,
Okay.
you can't supersede a state statute.
Okay.
It's there.
So
And
the green part's okay in your opinion then?
Hmm?
The green highlighted portion that's in this is okay in your opinion?
The question I had about the green highlighted portion was where it says, with an adopted emergency clause. Does that particular language need to be in there? Because it sounds like, to me, the only time that they can modify anything is they have to declare an emergency.
Well, I think in that instance, if they're doing it by a majority vote of council, the assumption is that there is some needed immediacy, and they're already going to be waiving the 3 readings, and that you would legitimately want to have it passed.
Yeah, like, I'm okay with that
Okay.
language. It just points out that statute's out there, that's another alternative procedure.
Okay,
And I agree with James in his interpretation with the emergency clause. I mean, you can't, I don't think this compels the city council to adopt an emergency clause. They may
No.
decide they don't want to. In
That's-
fact, there's an aversion, I will tell you, of this council
yeah,
not to have an
Yes,
emergency clause.
right.
Unless it's a genuine emergency.
that's right. And I don't want to point them, and that's the only way that amendments can be made, you know. So that gives them the option of doing 3 readings in 3 months or 1 in
If
emergency
you're
clause.
reading it once and going to the next month, it's not an emergency.
That's right,
Okay.
that's right. I get it, okay.
That's why I was questioning whether or not that language needs to be in there or not.
My concern is more so that we just don't try to give the impression that we're trying to circumvent that statute that says the city
No.
council has that authority. I don't want to give the
okay.
impression that, because we can't. It's a statute.
No,
If I'm reading this right, leaving the emergency clause basically says ordinarily we're going to run this thing normally like the rest of this section says.
And we have
But
the
if it's an emergency,
the
we're
option is
going
out there.
to do it right now.
Yeah, they can
Okay.
suspend the rules and go to the second and the third reading and then vote it in, and vote in the emergency clause, but it has to be a separate vote.
It has to be separate vote, yeah, okay.
Yeah, I would say when the reading of it would be, let's say 1,000 years from now, when this is considered a holy text. And the commentaries are gonna, that'll be much debated, but I think that's the assessment that they would have.
Corey, I want to make sure that shows up in the minutes.
I have a few questions and comments as well. So under paragraph E.1, that last word where we're saying they'll be deemed late and will not be accepted, are we really intending not to accept an application? Or are we intending that we'll accept it, but it will not be placed on the agenda?
Correct.
So it'll go to the next regular meeting
The
agenda?
appropriate agenda based on the submittal deadline.
Yeah,
And
so
all of
I'm-
that is made clear in the planning commission calendar, all of the language and detail
Yeah,
into
not the
that.
dates and all
Yes.
that. So I wonder if the word accepted might need to change, or
Maybe accepted for commission consideration.
accepted for the current agenda or something.
Yeah.
Just
Okay.
something that, we're not telling them we're never going to
Okay,
look at it. It's just the cycle, it has to hit the cycle.
Okay.
So whatever terminology, and I think there's maybe a couple places that,
It's too much
it was
like not-
consistent throughout all of the amendments.
Yeah.
Yeah, to remain consistent.
yeah, so we will have to probably adjust
It can
there.
reflect all of it. Uh-huh.
Yeah. So, and then the next one, I think I'm in the same section. So where does this be? Ooh. It's on page 5, is that the same, or did I skip to the other sections of the code? There was a section where we're using the word vote. It's actually on page 5 in the red text, right above paragraph 2, where we say, shall be made before a vote by the planning commission. Or is that really a vote, or is it, again, an agenda placing term?
A vote before the planning commission, before the item will be voted on by the planning commission.
Right, but should it go further back to when it gets placed on the agenda is my question. So, because what we're talking about here is the public notice being given in accordance and payment of non-refundable fee happening. But does that need to happen before a vote, or does it happen before you get on the agenda for consideration, is my question.
So what this section is speaking to, this item has already been accepted for the appropriate meeting, and it's speaking to an amendment of the application sought later than 10 days. It would go under staff reconsideration, and then it would have to be, public notice would then have to be given and payment of that non-refundable fee, essentially for re-review, before it could go back on the agenda for for a vote on the item.
Yeah, so maybe that's what we say, made before it's placed on an agenda for a vote.
Okay.
Or something. It just seems like they could actually just, get it on the agenda and then promise to pay it before the meeting, and that also slips
Well,
in mind.
and that would be an administrative action though as well, based on the submittal and what all is included.
Of course,
So.
yeah. I think that was it for this section. Some of my comments, thank you.
Okay, it's on page 4. Section little letter C in the middle of the page. That last paragraph says, "The city of Sherwood shall supply the required property owner list." And this is the section that deals with a property owner asking for something to be done. And I just thought it might be better if it said, "The city of Sherwood shall supply the list of required addresses."
Okay, so a language issue, just rewording that?
Yeah, just
Okay.
reword it, say the required addresses, because it's saying that the applicant is, got to notify all these, not only just the property owners, but also the school board members and the school superintendent. They may not have those addresses,
So
whereas
it,
we would already have those addresses.
so presently, and I'll just give you a little background. So as amendments currently exist within the procedures that we have, it is the applicant's responsibility to go to an abstract company and procure the list based on a 300-foot radius of the property itself. So that is something in turn with this amendment that staff is going to take on that responsibility and procure that list for them.
But we already, but I'm not talking about beyond the property owners. it also says they have to notify the school board members, the Air Force Base. We already have that list.
That would all be included. We are
gonna be-
providing, yes, that would all be included, but it is their responsibility to notify the appropriate parties of the proposed amendment.
Okay. And that was, I think, the only other changes are, that I had on that.
And there's, on C, page 1, with the amendments, there's just a spelling, number 3.
Yes, and I will, rest assured, staff will go through and fix all the grammatical errors and typos, and we discussed that earlier, so we will fix that up.
I don't see, one last comments, because I don't see it in here, but I know in the succeeding sections that we're going to look at today, there was some mention of, fee dollar amounts, and then a reference to the fee schedule and language within the body of that section. And I was curious on the other sections if we could just maybe delete that language and just reference them to the fee table, and, because it also says that the fee table, it applies unless the city council comes up with a fee table, which
Okay.
would take precedence, that might kind of,
We can remove that,
yeah,
certainly,
that would
that's easy.
probably streamline that a little bit. I don't know if it's in this section, I didn't note it in this section, so.
I agree, wherever that shows up, that just cuts down the verbiage.
It's in there several times.
Yeah.
Give you something to work with?
Certainly.
Anything else? And I, personally, I would be more comfortable looking at a final version next month.
So,
Agreed. Okay. If there's nothing further, we'll move on.
Amendment to the Sherwood zoning code regarding chapter 140210, conditional use permits.
All right, so this is the same in nature. Anything green was added today, whether that was a positive add or something that we are proposing to take out. And with that, there is some I tried to go in based on the discussion in the minutes. It was very minimal last month. I figured we needed significantly more conversation for the conditional use permit amendments. So you will notice some of the like things that we are proposing to change with the amendment section in this as well.
Okay, this is another one where we deferred the public hearing, and I'm tempted to defer it once again, simply because if there's more changes made, there might be some public interest in it. So I'll call the public hearing. Is there anybody who wishes to speak? Okay, I'm not going to close it. We will defer it until next month. Comments? I'll say one of the things I really liked was what you struck out in green. I was going to comment on that because basically, one of the things that I'm concerned about is separating, there's two functions. A conditional use is not a rezone. When you collapse them together in the same place, it sounds like, smells like, feels like, tastes like it's a rezone application. And when you're talking about lowering the intensity of a proposed zoning district, that's a completely separate action from a conditional use. And so it really wouldn't belong here because it's part of the amendment chapter. So I like that. And I don't have very many comments, not as many as last time, I promise you. But on the purpose, on A, where it says a permit may or may not be desirable and appropriate in all circumstances, it's basically saying we have the right to turn this down because we may or may not like it, when in truth, what the real issue is that a conditional use may or may not be appropriate in one or more zoning districts. The issue for conditional use is not zoning, it's always use. Is the use appropriate? And I would just like to see the language emphasizing that both for the commission and for the council. I have always had a bit of a concern about combining a conditional use with a rezone application. There's numerous instances over the years in the past where the ordinance said rezoning this property from R1 to R1 conditional. There is no such thing as an R1 conditional zone. So it's mixing and confusing a use requirement to a zoning requirement. And so I would just simply like to see that emphasizing whether a use is permitted in one or more districts and not emphasize whether we can permit it at all. Because a conditional use is a permitted use. The only difference between that permitted use and one that has a condition on it is that it may or may not be appropriate at a given location in the zone for which it's conditional. And that's just the only thing I really want to emphasize. It's possible to request a conditional use and a rezone, but not as one thing. In my mind, that's two separate issues and show up as two separate things. First, you approve the rezone if you think that's appropriate. It's consistent with the land use plan. Then you consider the use that's to be proposed. It's orthodoxy, and James can correct me where I'm wrong, but even members of our city council know that once you approve a rezone, it does not matter what they said they were going to do. Once that rezone has been changed, anything that's allowed in that zone is fair game. And when you do them together as a conditional use, as a part of the rezone, you have in fact done contract zoning. And that's a real iffy legal issue that I can't really speak to. I know that it's frowned upon. Most planners will say stay away from that sort of thing, because that time you are now zoning a piece of property and say this is the only thing you can use it for. And that's kind of risky. So that's why I would argue keep the two things separate in the language here. I would rather not see it say you can do a single application. I want to keep it separate. One thing's a conditional use, that's the ones we're talking about, and the other is the rezone. So I just like them separate.
Yeah, I think the intent with that wasn't necessarily to couple them. It was more to allow, what's the word I'm looking for? Why can't I remember that? It basically allow review of them at the same time. They're separate applications, but allow them to be reviewed at the same meeting. That was the intent of that provision.
That's fair, but the wording suggested that it was like a single issue. And I really want to separate them so there's a clear understanding about what a conditional use is as opposed to what a rezone is. And my other, it's not so much an issue on E, on the standards for approval. Again, where I'm coming from is that the use is permitted. What we're looking for is what conditions would be necessary to make sure that the use that's permitted at this location wouldn't cause problems for adjoining property owners. That's what we're looking for. What should we require? And the nature of the first sentence, I would change it to something like conditions imposed shall be necessary to minimize the external effects of maintenance and operation that will harm adjacent properties, rather than say, well, it's a condition that we're looking for. And everything that follows that are the sorts of things that we can impose conditions on. I mean, it's important to me as a commissioner to know, what does the code say? How far can I go to put a condition on a property owner? It always has to be related to public health, safety, and welfare against neighboring properties. That's what I'm coming for. And as a practical matter, it would be inappropriate to say, well, no, we don't like what you're doing here, so we'll just not let you do it. I mean, that, to me, is taking a person's property without due process. But if you say that you cannot have light shining on the neighbors, you have to have adequate parking for the kind of volume you're expecting. You can't let the drainage run off. You have to have enough buffer so that the noise doesn't bother people. I mean, they're legitimate things that you can tell them that they have to do. And in my opinion, if they don't want to do it, they can appeal it, or they can just not go ahead with the project, or change it so that they can go ahead, but they can make it harmless to the neighbors. So I like the standards in here after you get past one, because one isn't very descriptive. The rest of them are starting to get descriptive and gives me better guidance about what we can, as a commission, can do. Does that make sense? The other thing, the final thing that I'll throw out there is on number F4, I don't know, 6, it's 6. It's the second paragraph. If the use is abandoned or ceases, if you automatically say, okay, it reverts back to its original condition. We have had at least one situation in the city where a building was vacant for a number of years, and somebody else wanted to come in and use that building for the same purpose. And I may have misspoke earlier, Counselor, I apologize. The conditional use doesn't really go with the property, it goes with the use on the property, as opposed, there has always been a question, well, does it go to the owner? No, it doesn't go to the owner, it goes to the use. So if the use, if it's turned down after abandoned, that means the next person that comes in and wants to use it for the very same thing has to go through this process all over again. I would rather have an option there that says if it's going to be used, it can be abandoned for a while, but as long as it's safe and can be occupied and used, that they ought to be able not to have to go through that risk, but to use it for the same purpose. And the only thing you'd have to confirm at the staff level is that, yes, it's the same use that was granted prior. If it's for a different use, well, yeah, they got to go through that process again.
So you're talking about the number 5, provision on expiration?
Yeah.
Would it be easier if the first one says if it's not commenced within 18 months, then it's basically expires? Would it be easier if that second provision was longer than 18 months? Maybe it was 36 months or something. I mean, the issue that comes up is, I always have a Conway story, so just bear with me. We granted conditional uses. People would come back to us with a conditional use that was granted in the 90s, when the regulations that the city had were totally different, and the zoning of the city was totally different. And they would come back and say, well, I'm ready to exercise this conditional use, and the use at that point was just not appropriate to the location anymore, because so many circumstances had changed. People had made investments and decisions based on the fact that that use hadn't been exercised. And so a great example was a storage unit in one location. The thought in the 90s was, oh, this is going to become a commercial corridor, so let's let all that go in there. That never happened, but you still had this conditional use for this mini storage. And so I think the commencement provision, it expires. needs to stay in there because those circumstances may change. I can see an argument for a longer deadline if it's been vacant, but if it's vacant for 3 years and it doesn't, it's not recommencing, that's a pretty substantial period in a dynamic city. That could be an indicator that may not be a good use in that location.
Or possibly, there could be, if you could carve out the possibility that they, as long as it was not inconsistent with current ordinance or regulatory requirements, that it wouldn't have to go through all that again. I mean, any time period you put out there is arbitrary. And again.
To a certain extent.
If the facility is ramshackle and falling down, well, yeah, I mean, that could be a code issue.
Yeah. I'm not sure how we would necessarily write it differently unless there was just a longer period. That's my main concern.
Well, and the issue that happened before was clearly an economic development issue. Would have been a problem for the city getting a new business in a facility that was perfectly okay to do it. And I don't remember how long the gap was.
You have something to the effect that, if it is, at the staff level, if it is determined to be the same use, that no further action is necessary, but maybe have a little bit of limiting language on what you were saying about if subsequent ordinances or regulations have changed that make it inappropriate, then you have to do a reapplication, have an either or.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah.
You get all that?
So I have a,
Well, I'm, okay, so I'm thinking of it from like a staff perspective. If there is no time limit on it, how is staff supposed to keep up with a conditional use that's been active for 10 years and then they come back in with turnover and we know documentation never gets lost?
I think my other concern is it kind of exposes staff to, if something shows back up and it was controversial the first time, and then it comes back on staff, that staff is the one that approved it, that's not a position that would be very kind to staff, to be honest
Yeah,
with
I agree with that. And boy, in terms of keeping track of conditional uses, good luck. I mean, when I look at the map, one of the things I would really like to see is, does this parcel have a conditional use? Rather than going back through all of, 500 ordinances
Well, there you go.
that did a rezone to see if there was a conditional use in it.
Well, we are working on that as well, so being interactive with ordinances.
So I agree.
Would 24 months be appropriate? I think there needs to be some timeline on it. That's,
so I have a question on the conditional use permit. So it expires after 18 months, but what if it's within the 18 months, it's change hands, like sell the project to someone else? Is it still good, or the new person has to go through all the process again?
No, it's still good.
No, it's still good because it stays with the site, not the owner.
It stays with the use
Chairman
at the
was
the
saying,
site.
use, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I wouldn't be opposed to shortening that time, because a building permit's only good for 12 months from the day you get it. If you can't,
And you must start construction within 6 months?
yeah. see,
So
Typically, commercial doesn't expire, residential expires.
Now, I would argue
It's
that,
not ever, even if you don't start, this language is about not,
6 months
yeah.
will kick in. If you have to start it within 6
it's
months,
null and void.
then that building permit's null and void,
Yeah.
regardless if it's commercial or
Yeah.
residential.
the reasoning for 18 is, a lot of times folks will go out and get the conditional use prior to having any design plans drawn up. I mean, it is entirely conceptual at that point. And so it legitimately could be, I mean, a long time before they get approved and get funding and everything.
Yeah, I could see that.
Okay, but one quick question. That "and" in there, in that sentence, I think it's supposed to be an "or." not an and.
That's a good, yes.
I think that's supposed to be an or.
Like I said, staff will clean this up. Don't you
I
worry.
think that's supposed to be an or.
Yeah, that should be an or, yeah.
So I had one comment, which was on paragraph D2C, the third, where we added the appeals to the city council shall be reviewed. And I was curious if we could just reference, because we've got, if we could take what we need out of this and put it in 1409 rather than here, because that's the amendments piece. So here we're talking about appeals and how that gets handled and comes back to the planning commission. It seems like that might be.
So, I mean, I see what you're saying. That way it's just, it reduces the language with this section and refers to another section
Which
specifically.
we refer to at the end anyway, so.
Right.
At least in part.
I mean, I'm open for discussion on that, if it references back to 140209, which is amendments that has the same process. I think it's easier whenever it's all, and I'm speaking with both hats because I understand what you're saying, but I also deal with people who call, and whenever we give them packets and we're like, hey, here's what you need to do, and it's explicitly clear on what is required, it seems to normalize the process. But I'm open to discussion with that, just to hear other perspectives.
I agree. If it's not in here, then it doesn't exist.
So we pull out pieces of the zoning code and we give them to people based on what they're doing.
We take out, that's what we do. We have things separated when it comes to particular items that come before you.
Then you have to leave it in. Yeah, you have to leave it.
If it were sort of consistent across the board, then it should go in another section like the general provisions, and it would apply to all of those. But in this case, it's only in two places, if I'm understanding that.
Well, I mean, it's,
One's in the amendment and the other's in conditional
Yes,
use.
I guess that kind of begs the question, are there other parts of the amendment section that then would apply to the conditional use that we need to, that need to be in this section as well, like the reverse question?
To be clear, and my understanding is that the amendment section is specifically and exclusively for zoning, for rezoning.
Yes, and that's how the
Oh,
current
gotcha.
code is
Okay.
set up. That's how these sections are actually set up as is in
Well,
this moment.
rezoning or text.
Yes.
Yeah,
But there is some language that's in the amendment section that mirrors the same language as in the non-conforming use, or the conditional use permit section. Those languages need to match up.
Right, and that's what, whenever this revision is done, there will be consistency across the board. That's why you'll notice some of the language in here that we discussed in the amendments is going to be revised, and it will reflect,
It's just
like,
the fee table we were talking about.
correct. All of that, I already have it scratched out, and I'm ready to go.
okay.
So everything we have discussed thus far that is set to be removed, I have it reflective on the conditional use.
I did want to note one thing. When I drafted this, if you look at C1 on legal notice, it would be good to include in the amendments text as well, where it says of general circulation within the city of Sherwood or means allowed by Arkansas law. We're probably a few sessions away from being able to do electronic advertisements. And so that was the reason why I put that in there, but I messed up and forgot to put it in the other one. It was just set up to where we don't have to amend the code once that law changes.
My only concern about that at this particular point in time is there could be some unbeknownst statute somewhere or that could be interpreted to allow something that,
It's specifically, I think it's specifically addressed in 1456-422, when the municipal league has drafted or participated in the drafting of some previous bills. The bills went through and referenced every single section of state law needed to be changed. So if that does change, I would anticipate that it would be changed in that specific state statute pertaining to planning.
Well, do we want to reference that statute? Or,
Oh, we certainly can.
that's what I'm getting at. It helps someone
Yeah.
know where to go and look for that information.
Yeah.
And then in section, I guess it's C3, the public notice section, there again is where it says that paragraph that says the city of Sherwood shall provide, or excuse me, shall supply the required property owner list. That's where I thought it should read required addresses.
I have, yes,
Yeah,
I have all of that. That will reflect the same as the amendments.
That's all I had under that.
Anything else? Okay. And again, we will consider this next month.
I do, I do want to add, it is pretty cool that staff is doing such a good job that we could take that notification requirement and put it on to something that staff would do rather than costing each applicant hundreds of dollars a month in funds, that we've got good competent staff that is capable of doing the GIS technology that requires that. And that's really neat.
The GIS will get it, eliminating the need to go to abstract. And
Yes.
that cost,
Yeah.
that is a good
Yes.
thing.
So,
So shout out to Cheryl.
yeah.
Let's give her a shout out.
$600 going back into people's pockets
Yeah.
every
Yeah, that's
time they
great.
make an application.
Excellent. Okay, next item.
Amendment to the Sherwood zoning code regarding chapter 1411 signs.
All right. This is all, it's quite the document, so I'm flipping through real quick. So first and foremost, speaking of our wonderful GIS analyst Cheryl, she went in and the map of the freeway sign area, everything that referenced zone prior now says area, and the area is strictly within the city limits of Sherwood, so that should reflect. So you will next, if you flip to the definitions, staff added a definition for the sign general temporary. It has since been amended. It previously read a permitted sign not permanently attached to a building structure or the ground and intended for limited display during operating hours of the non-residential use for a period no greater than 12 months. It has been amended to read a type of temporary sign for a permit is required and allowed solely for non-residential uses. And sorry, that's really hard to read, the green and red.
Really?
Just like Christmas. So. And then, are we ready to move on? Okay, so within the table, it's 141105. Sorry, this document does not have page numbers. Anyway, the temporary signs, it speaks to in all zones, the temporary signs when a garage or yard sale is conducted at a building or parcel/lot. That has since been amended today, so it will reflect in the changes in green. So what staff did for enforcement issues, we went in, and there will be, and James can correct me if I'm wrong, basically an online document that further references property owner permission to place signs. So rather than placing a number, they have to obtain property owner permission to be able to place that sign, limiting the ability to place on government city property public right-of-way, things of that nature. So staff has gone in, we have removed the number allowed, so that will be dependent on their permission. The installation is going to stay the same as proposed, as well as the square footage and the height requirement, but the duration time, it was originally no more than 48 hours. Now that is to read up to 24 hours prior to the sale and ending at 6 PM on the day of the sale. Total duration no more than 48 hours. So that was something that was not in your packet. It is now before you.
This may not be a fair question to ask of you, James, but do you believe that that language for that use will survive legal scrutiny?
Well, I'm not an attorney.
What do you think?
Point me to the specific part you have a question.
It's the temporary signs for a garage or yard sale. Now, it's being really specific about what the content of the sign is, and we're specifying during which period they can be up. I just want to be sure that we're on good ground.
Temporary signs when a garage or yard sale is conducted in a building, parcel, or lot. So you're thinking in terms of read, if that's content neutral or not?
I think it is still content neutral. Because we're not specifying exactly what the sign says, we're not regulating the actual content of it. If, let's say I were to hold not a public hearing, hold a garage sale 24 hours before the garage sale, I could go out and put signs out that basically said, James is, the best person that's in the entire world. And as long as I put that on my property, and I went to anybody else and got permission from them on their property under their provisions for for temporary signage, that could go up as well. And it's in no way connected to whether it's a garage sale or not. It's just that there's an allowance for additional signage when there is a garage sale. Most rational human beings will put out garage sale signs, but I wouldn't be rational in that case. I would put up, something about how I love myself, and so that would be.
I think there's a custom as to how garage sales go, and I think this just gives just reasonable parameters about, when the signs go up, when the signs go down. Mostly all they're gonna say is garage sale to a large extent. If they want to put more information on it, that's fine. We can't, limit that. I don't think it's enough to trigger an issue.
On an estate sale.
Kind of the same thing. It just says estate sale has the address. I mean, it's just information.
We don't have a estate sale listed there, we just have yard sale and garage sale. But you see when somebody does an estate sale, there'll be a sign in front of the house, but there's also gonna be a series of signs that come off of some main highway somewhere.
Directional signs.
Garage /
Right.
estate. Put them in the same category.
It could,
We could
we could
add a
add,
definition.
a
for what that-
definition would suffice
for a
that,
sale, yeah,
right.
Estate
Carport
sale.
sale, estate sale, I mean, however you want to define it.
yeah.
It's a sale.
Well, I hope you're right, but it was the temporary signs by the church that triggered Reed in the first place. And this is a temporary sign of a limited duration that's doing the same thing off-site. And so that's why I was concerned.
Well, I think the key difference in this is there is already a provision for non-residential uses. So there's a provision for non-residential uses to have temporary signage. we have a provision for temporary signage on an ongoing basis that is content neutral. What these 2 to 3 things that are right here, whether it's for sale or lease, or when it's under construction, or when some type of sale is ongoing in that location, they're just additional allowances for signage. But it does not in any way, shape, form, fashion, regulate what the content is. It's just in a provision for additional signage, an additional avenue for messaging at that point. Not
Well, I would-
favoring any kind of speech.
I will just say this, I thought that broad ruling by the Supreme Court was dumb in the context of yard sales. And-
What it was, it related to the fact that they had provisions allowing for all types of events that could be for a variety of things, but the issue was the church was trying to advertise, they were a church that they just met in various locations. And so they had to have a lot of directional signage to say, hey, we're meeting at this location. Based on their particular type of usage, they weren't allowed signage. And so there was no medium or avenue for them to do that, the type of advertising that they wanted. And so that's really the reason why it went totally content neutral, because the idea is that there was some type of, discriminatory prejudice against certain types of speech because you allowed it for this, but you didn't allow it for that. The difference here is there's a general allowance for any type of speech, and then during a certain event, you get an additional allowance for any type of speech. And so it does not have to be tethered to the use at all, even though that's 99% of people are going to tether it to that.
I rest. Are there any other questions or concerns on signs? I think we're to the point where we decide whether we want to send this out as amended with a hard-to-read green mark.
And the definition.
In the, yeah,
Yes.
I think a lot of good work going into this one, so I think I'm ready to see it go to the council, so make a motion, we prove it to the council.
Second.
Abernathy,
Aye.
Jones,
Aye.
Hoskin. Patel.
Aye.
Middleton.
Aye.
Martin.
Aye.
There being no further business, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Here in 3 seconds.
Abernathy.
Aye.
Jones,
Aye.
Hoskin. Patel.
Aye.
Middleton.
Aye.
Martin.
Aye.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Does it matter if I voted on the last one?